Your fantasy footy pre-season is going into overdrive with the start of the Community Series. Gone are those pesky match simulation, practice club, trial, intra-practice, whatevers. We're getting real close to the nitty-gritty. The Community Series over the next week gives us our last and final look at what teams may be doing heading into the start of the 2025 fantasy footy season. So here at the Coaches Panel, we have put together our 7 rules of how you should watch, learn, observe, and apply everything you see during the Community Series matches. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've got a rule of how you observe and apply what you watch in these games, we'd love for you to comment below and let us know what they are. Number 1, here is probably an underrated one. That transition scorers are much more favoured than stoppage scorers. Over the last 12 to 18 months, the understanding in the fantasy football community of where and how a player scores their points is growing more and more so. But if you've watched any of these practice match intra simulations, whatever you'd like to call them, you should be able to come to one pretty strong conclusion, and the Community Series games are going to be very, very similar. That being, they're a low stoppage, low contest, very, very much so, bruise-free football. Unfortunately, injuries are a part of the game. Just heartbreaking news to see in the past few days. Jagger Smith out for what's probably to be the season with an ACL just from a practice game. It's horrible luck. Teams don't want to be losing good players, star players, young guns like a Jagger. And so while they are looking and trialing a bunch of different things, they are going to be making sure that the impact injuries that are more preventable are taken out of the game a little bit. And so that means players that score heavily from stoppage, whether that be through contested ball winning, clearances, tackles, don't expect these scoring elements to be super duper high. Rather, players that score a lot from free-flowing ball movement, transition scoring, lots of uncontested ball movement outcomes. Expect these players, if you are tracking their SuperCoach and AFL fantasy points, to be the ones that are more likely to pop the higher scoring elements, because the game style will be a little bit more protected for them, given teams are certainly going to be as protective as they can. And so for us here at the Coaches Panel, if it's a high stoppage scorer and they don't score well, quote unquote, I wouldn't be too concerned about that, because these game styles are much more free flowing, much more open. And as a result, stoppage scoring will be up, and those who score with a good to high split of stoppage, just not going to see that as high. Kind of leads us beautifully into our second rule of the preseason, and that is that a player's role trumps what they score every single day. Now, of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but I'm not really too interested in what a player's fantasy points per minute are or how many SuperCoach points they get, because it's not a real and true reflection of what is going on. What I'm actually, and would be encouraging you to as well, when it comes to these Community Series and other practice games, is look at the role of where is this player playing and what is happening around them. How are the club choosing to use this player? To me, that is much more a greater insight rather than the points. Now, the points will matter based on what they do in opening round, but in the Community Series, it doesn't. And so therefore, I'm not too fussed about the points. I am desperately keen on the role. What are they doing? Where are they playing? And how are they looking in that spot? To me, that tells me a lot more than whether they or not they pop a 30-point quarter or not. Games change. Styles of ball movement change, conditions change, opponents vary. All of those things are fluctuating. Just don't get caught up on them. It's different in opening round, where the points, while they don't count to the overall price of points on field, should I say, they do impact the price movement of a player. So it does matter a little bit more in opening round, but not in the Community Series. Focus on the role. Don't worry about the points. In that, our third rule is know who's missing. Sometimes a player can be getting eased back in and through their preseason, and as a result, they're not playing in the Community Series or these practice match intra-club simulations. As a result of a player that's likely best 22 being out, somebody else is going to pop and get a better opportunity and get a more favourable role that, should it not been for that, it's unlikely they would land in that pocket. Knowing who's missing gives you an indication of how to have a level of potential caution about what we may be seeing with a player's role. I'll give you an example of something to keep an eye on. In the practice game between Adelaide and Port Adelaide last week, lots of people were fascinated about the Crows midfield, predominantly trying to keep an eye on Peatling, Draper and Dawson as the three more fantasy football relevant trio of names. But there was one real obvious name missing, Isaac Rankin. The club have been adamant he's coming into this midfield unit at a heavier split than what we saw last year. Well, if he's coming in, what does that do to the Crouch, to the Peatling, to the Saligo, to the Dawson, to the Draper? We don't know. And as a result, it's meant we've had to wait until the community series to get a little bit more information. Will a player like a Jack Sinclair play for St Kilda in this community series? If he doesn't, what does that do for another player's ball movement? Does a Schoenmaker pop a little bit more than he should? Does a Travalia get a little bit more opportunities than he should? This is what it means. Don't just watch what a player's doing and the role they have. Know who's not there due to injury, and it will give you an indication of something to either be a little bit more cautious in your advancement of that selection or confident in that selection, knowing the players that are and aren't in that spot. Our fourth rule for pre-season guide for how you can watch, learn, and apply everything you're seeing in these games so that when you get to the start of the year, you're not unintentionally tripping yourself over with some info. It's just a reminder. The premium top-end players in games like this are in 100% first gear. For them, it's not about match conditioning for the most part. For them, it's not about confidence and synergy in the role. If we're talking about the best of the best premium fantasy footballers, for them, it's just about getting through a game of football, working on a few little kind of style and structural pieces around them. But if you're getting a premium, it's because you're confident they're the top of their line. If they score a 50 or a 40, or who cares unless their role has drastically changed? They are in first gear. They don't have anything to prove to the coach. They don't have anything to prove that they belong at the level. They're not fighting for the bottom 2 or 3 options to get selected for round 1. They're in the best 22, if not the best 5 in their team already. And so you're going to see these elite performers and elite premiums, a bunch of them just cruising around because there's nothing left for them to prove at this stage of their career in a preseason and a community series match. So again, don't be worried if you just see them jogging through the motions at times. They're not going to be, if they're carrying an injury, they're not going to be playing them, especially in the front half of the game, because they're just managing workload and minutes and just trying to get through without any concerns from a health or physicality perspective. And so if your premium performs and they just jog on, I wouldn't be too concerned. If what they do in a half a footy is enough to turn you out of them, then maybe you're not. You shouldn't be there anyway. Hey, last 3 rules for how to watch a preseason game and not make a silly mistake would be simply this: is what you see in the first half trumps what you see in the second half. For teams, this is their last chance to trial rotations, structures, best 22, 23, 24, plays in certain combinations through the midfield as a centre bounce option. This is it for teams before they go back to internal opportunities and ultimately then opening round and the first round to play. And so teams are probably, in my opinion, definitively going to use this first half to be as close to full fitness best 22 that they can possibly get, to get as close a feel of synergy, fluencies, combinations that they can. And then in the third quarter and fourth quarter, because it's expanded benches, open things up a little bit more, rest some of their top end stars They got that hit out of footy. They're going to give them that break. They're just managing that workload. They've got them through problem-free, happy days. And so if you're to weight what happens in terms of role, position, who's in what spot and pocket of the ground, to me, the first half is going to tell you a lot more than what the second half is going to be. They're not going to be trudging out their stars deep into the game unless they're trying to build a workload and manage that minutes up a little bit more. If it's a fully fit, fully healthy player, it's just first half on, then just get them off and get through. So to me, what I see in the first half is going to trump the second half. Then last two rules I've got for you is look for signs where you can of a team game style change. It doesn't have to be big and major, but are there little call signs that sit through there? Yes, teams at times are not going to reveal everything. Yes, some of the top-end players in the league are not going to be absolutely chomping and frothing to deliver. But there's going to be little hallmarks that you can see just to keep mental notes on, as it helps you with those either 50-50 decisions before you head to the first lockout, or define what you're already certain about. I'll give you a little bit of a clue of what I mean. Calling back to that same game of Adelaide versus Port Adelaide late last week, it was really evident to me that I saw what I'd been hearing about in the preseason. And what I'd been hearing about from Port Adelaide was a desire to do a much more direct ball movement, to attack the corridor, to press up higher with their forwards and actually work back and create some open ball movement so that their forwards can work into space behind them, not just in front of them. And I saw on 2 or 3 occasions that forward press coming up really high up onto the wings, and then multiple times the foot race back to get that ball into open space as a way of trying to expose opposition and their desires to intercept and to stall the game. That's not something that I'd historically seen frequently from Port Adelaide over the last couple of years, and just noted, oh, that's a little bit different to what I'd seen. That's a little bit different how they'd moved the ball. Again, you take it with a grain of salt, but when you see things in these games that are confirmation of what you've heard in multiple places across the preseason, it starts to confirm a narrative. And so as you're watching these games, teams are, while not giving away trade secrets, working on, especially in the first half, things that they want to see change and do in their team. And so just look for them, because it might just give you a little sense that this team might be either being a bit more, playing with some more speed on the ball. And as a result, some of those opportunities for easier uncontested possessions and marks might not be as high. Conversely, teams might be looking to attack certain areas of the ground and open up scoring for certain players depending on where they sit. So just keep a little look and see. They're not going to be majorly overt about it, but there will be moments that sit through there. And then my last rule that I could kind of give you some encouragement to navigate watching these preseason and community series games is this. Once the last game ends, just swipe your team clean. Just absolutely erase any memory of it to your mind and rebuild your team now that you've got a preseason's worth of knowledge and information. Because if you're a coach's panel follower and viewer, chances are you sit yourself a little bit more on the hardcore side of a fantasy football coach, meaning when the platforms opened in December and early January, you've had a team now for 8 to 10 weeks that you've been building, and you've built much of your team based on information and made tweaks and changes as you go. But the reality is when you keep making adjustment here, adjustment here, adjustment here, adjustment here, adjustment here, all of a sudden your team looks a little bit different, and you're dropping players out of structures that you never had before. You're doing things you hadn't because you're reactionary making moves, which sometimes are right and sometimes are wrong. It's why, for me, I'd encourage you at the end of the community series, just, you know what? Get rid of all the players on your team. And now with fresh eyes, with fresh information, look and rebuild it. We've seen so many players go down that were important structurally for us this preseason. I'm talking Kadeen Coleman. I'm talking Mateus Philippou, and then most recently a Jagger Smith. In a bunch of our teams, they were pretty important pieces. And maybe, just maybe, you've been squeezing different things and you're not quite loving it. You've seen now some signs that having defensive premiums might be the way to go because there's not a lot at the bottom end. Equally, you might be gaining in confidence of fielding more forward rookies because it does seem that some of them might have better scoring and job security from a vest perspective more than even our midfield rookies. Giving yourself all the information to make an informed decision, not just squeezing things in because it fit your structure 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, is never the way to go. And so can I encourage you? It feels bold if you've never done it before, but it's really quite freeing. Clear your team out, rebuild it from scratch. You might just find your team looks even better than you thought. But if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, friend, make sure you do so and give this video a thumbs up like. What are your rules of how you follow and watch preseason games? We're all frothing to see some footy back finally again. We do get a little bit reactive at times, sometimes for the better and the worse. But have you got a rule for how you watch these games? I'd love to know what they are. Comment below and let me know. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast and you haven't subscribed and given us the 5 stars, friend, jump on. We'd love for you to do that. And, of course, you can keep in touch with us across social media, get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch, and become part of the Patreon. They've got a bunch of tiers that are in our Patreon that are probably right for you. We'd love for you to become part of the Patreon, support the Coaches Panel, and gain some extra content and community access just for doing so as well. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in on another episode. We'll be back tomorrow talking all things fantasy footy.